Welcome everyone to our Climate Week event, to plant or not to plant. That is a question, and we're so grateful you're here. My name is Erin Axelrod. I'm the project director for the Trees for Climate Health initiative, and I'm joined by some really esteemed heroes in this space, Atosa Soltani of the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative and Justin Winters of One Earth. Yeah. And as you're joining, we're so pleased to have an interactive opportunity in a time that is so full of Zoom panels that are less interactive. And so please do go on camera if you feel so called. It's nice to see your faces. We'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your affiliation, and where you're calling in from. If you know the native lands that you're calling in from, please include the unceded tribal land. And I'm going to give just a very brief overview of the Trees for Climate Health. We'll go into this in more detail. And before I do that, just acknowledging that all of us are calling in from bioregions and ecosystems. And so just thinking for a moment about the trees that surround us. If we are so fortunate to live in a place that has not been devastated by the deforestation across the globe. So taking a moment to honor the trees around us, to honor the indigenous folks that often are fighting for unceded lands and fighting for sovereignty, and taking a moment to acknowledge those important fights for sovereignty and the important ecosystems around us. So the Jonas Philanthropies Trees for Climate Health initiative is really founded in this principle of the right tree, the right place, the right community. So often when we talk about tree planting, we forget that there's this whole ecosystem of tree growing. And so how do we think beyond just a myopic lens of number of trees in the ground to really focus on the holistic conditions that foster a more integral reforestation approach. So an example of a right tree approach, this would be selecting a tree species that is well suited to meet both the ecosystemic needs, but also the human needs. One of the projects that we are so fortunate and humbled to have supported is a moringa reforestation effort led by women that provides economic livelihood opportunities and very, very important nutrition supports for women in Haiti. And this is led by our partner Despri. The right place really looks at this question of where can trees be most catalytic? And I'm really pleased that Justin will go into this and Atosa will go into this more in our session today around the global safety net. And then the right community is a critical criteria in terms of who is leading the projects, who's making the decisions. In our case, we're really fortunate amongst many of the projects we've funded. We have supported Trees, Water, and People, which has a community-based approach for all of their projects, namely the project that we've supported on Pine Ridge, which is led by the Lakota people who are in northern Turtle Island, North Dakota and South Dakota, and really focusing on this aspect of community-led reforestation of indigenous foodways. We use a data-driven approach. And so this is really focused on more holistic data than just the carbon benefits or just the kind of those types of metrics, but looking at how much of the resources are flowing to frontline communities, what percentage of the leadership is made up of frontline Black and Indigenous and women. What are the catalytic benefits? So cascading benefits such as food production, aquifer recharge, watershed rehabilitation, and more. And we are launching an effort our initial funder pledged $1 million towards tree growing projects.
Can they see me again?
And then we secured additional pledges towards a goal of securing additional matching pledges towards $10 million. This is just a brief summary of the applications we've received. We have a 180 strong database, and of those we've down selected to 38 projects funded, and we've deployed over 60% of that $1 million pledge, and grown, as you can see there, almost 800,000 trees to date through our funding project partners. Dollar per tree is a little under $1, and 52% of the projects have been led by person of color communities in 21 countries across 6 continents, and each of you will receive a slideshow of all the funded projects. But without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would like to pass it off to get our panel started. Rather than introducing the panelists with their bios, which you all read in the event invitation, I'm going to just ask both of these amazing women, to introduce themselves and their relationship to trees. So Atosa, would you kick us off? Please share, what is your relationship to trees and reforestation and conservation, by way of sharing who you are?
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. It's congratulations and thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. I'm Atosa Soltani. I'm a longtime forest activist, a forest lover. I've been working in the Amazon since I first went there in 1990, and I'm the founder of Amazon Watch, and still serve the board as the president of the board. I'm also the global coordinator for the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative, which is an alliance of 30 indigenous nations in Ecuador and northern Peru, who are basically committed to permanently protecting this region of the Amazon, one of the most biodiverse regions of the Amazon. And it's an area the size of the state of Oregon, or about 86 million acres. And so, I've just been called to the forest these last 30 years. It's been just an honor of my life to have the opportunity to be basically a voice for the forest, a voice for indigenous rights, and to bring light to how the destruction of the ecosystems in the Amazon affect all of us, and how we must really take urgent action. So I'll stop there. I'll tell you more about what we're doing after you hear from Justin. Thank you so much for having me.
And Justin, same question for you. Please share, what's your relationship to trees? What brings you to this work?
Sure. So Justin Winters, welcome everybody. Good morning. Really honored to be here with all of you, because I know there's a lot of deep knowledge on this call, even beyond Erin and Atosa. So I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. So Justin Winters, I'm the co-founder, executive director of One Earth. For many years before One Earth, which we kind of spun off and got going in 2019, I helped build and run the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation for 13 years, which was very serendipitous and an honor of a lifetime to be able to have the chance to help support the environmental movement and get over $100 million in grants to organizations around the world doing such critical work. Before that, I was in high school and an activist, an environmental activist actually. But my other love was fine arts and art history. And I had no idea that you could have a career fighting for the environment beyond, being a scientist. And I had grown up very, very connected to nature, connected to animals. It was where I found solace, where I found refuge. It was, I think it's innately in all of our DNA, but I felt a very special call to be of service to nature. And so I serendipitously fell into finding a career path that allowed me to support this incredible network of change makers around the world that really inspire me every day and keep me going. And I think we're at a really key moment, and I'll speak to this a little bit more when I share a few slides, but it's a scary time, but I also think that this is a moment for great transformation and opportunity, where collective action can really shine, and we can really show up for each other, and we can really show up for groups of people that have historically not received proper support, either, just support, but also resources, getting the resources to get the work done. So it's an incredible moment for us to redesign how we live here and to do it in a way that is much more in honor of all people and of the vast diversity on the planet.
Yeah. So Justin, I want to now hand it to you to go a little deeper into that. And I'm so grateful for everything you're about to share with folks. So please share kind of your approach and the framework that One Earth is using to think about reforestation and conservation and how they go hand in hand.
Sure. Thanks, Erin. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one moment here so you all can see it. So as I mentioned, co-founder and executive director of One Earth, where we use actionable science, inspiring advocacy, and something we call philanthroactivism to really drive collective action to solve the climate crisis, protect biodiversity, and create a future that's vibrant for all people and nature. I wanted to share here, well, actually, let me kick it off by saying, before we dive into this rather gnarly looking chart, that at One Earth, if I were to have a simplified statement around tree planting, I'd say that we don't believe in tree planting. We believe in actually rebuilding forests. Simply replanting, simply planting trees with drones or with other, a very kind of technical, technology-driven approach without having a more holistic approach that really honors both the great complexity and biodiversity of our systems, as well as the necessary leadership of local indigenous communities. If we don't take that alternate approach, then tree planting will fail. So I say that mostly as just a thought starter, not to say that all tree planting doesn't work, but really to challenge our original notions of tree planting or oversimplified versions of tree planting. So what you're seeing here has been a really interesting journey for us. We ended up funding a climate model that came out in early 2019. It was published by Science Advances. What we were looking for was an answer to a top line question. Is it possible to solve climate change? What is the limit? Now we all know that the limit is 1.5 degrees C. We just cannot endure the impacts that go beyond that. And we really need to be all in to ensure that we can limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so what was unique and special about this climate model, which we worked with leading IPCC authors, including folks at the German Aerospace Center, University of Technology, Sydney. It's actually a 500-page book. So this table that you're looking at, this graphic, is a 500-page book condensed into a visual. So happy to provide after the panel deeper information. But the simple answer to this climate model, and I'll get into some of the details and walk you through it, is that we can actually solve the climate crisis. Technically, it is achievable. We can do it with available technologies and really emphasizing and scaling natural climate solutions. And it's that natural climate solutions piece that is so important for really elevating and shining a light on right now, because there is, I'd say, an overwhelming emphasis throughout the community on technology solutions versus the solutions that are right in front of us and that are really pretty key to solving a myriad of issues that we're facing and ensuring that people can have a vibrant, healthy future. So to dig into the graphic a bit, so this is the 1.5 degree scenario in one graph. Specifically, this model is aiming for net zero by 2040, which gives us a good chance of limiting global average temperature to 1.5 degrees C, declining to 1.4 degrees C by the end of the century. In addition to rapid decarbonization of energy, which is this black mountain that you see on the screen, by about 8% per year, we need to protect and enhance the role of nature. Those blue and green areas that you see in the graphic show nature's contribution to regulating the carbon cycle through land and ocean carbon sinks. These are the wildlands and marine areas that absorb about half of our carbon dioxide emissions every year and store them. The gold area under the line, which we're here to discuss today, shows the potential of restoration to actively remove carbon from the atmosphere. Factoring in some net losses, the model indicates that we need about 150 gigatons of CO2 removal by 2100. What you're seeing right here is the carbon potential of land restoration. So this is a graphic, and you might need to move us over so you can see kind of the listing of the different restoration types that were included in the climate model. But this is digging into the restoration piece, the gold area that you saw on the graph before. So we funded research on the technical potential of natural carbon removal through 4 principal forest pathways that are divided into temperate and tropical zones. The biggest opportunity is reforestation, which is the lighter green areas across 350 megahectares of forest biomes. The darker green curve shows the potential for increasing carbon density through natural restoration of existing forests across 600 megahectares. The brown curve shows the potential for better forest management practices, and the red shows trees on agricultural land. All together, we find a technical potential of about 120 gigatons of CO2 that could be removed by 2100. Sorry, one sec. So I'd love to just throw out, just to make this a little more interactive, if anybody knows what this image is of. Chime in.
You can put it in the chat, you can unmute yourself. What do we think this is of?
I know very few people who actually know what this is, so I'm not surprised, but I know it's a smart audience, so you never know who's gonna know what the image is of. But the thing,
a forest of trees.
Exactly. Well done. So I know it looks like a psychedelic painting, but it's actually spectral LiDAR. It's a technology pioneered by Greg Asner at ASU that allows the detection of distinct tree species remotely. It's a real-time picture of biodiversity from space. So normally, you're all familiar with looking at an aerial image of the forest, and without a really trained eye, it really looks like broccoli. But this image is showing you just exactly how complex the forest really is and how many different tree species coexist together to create a healthy, diverse forest.
No.
The most important aspect to ensuring that rebuilding our forests is done right is that we actually support the original caretakers of the land, the indigenous communities that understand the complexity of our ecosystems and the best way to support its restoration. And we can do that by actually supporting efforts that are led by the indigenous peoples themselves. Just an interesting thing to point out, and many of you already know this, but 5,000 indigenous and tribal groups exist around the world. They occupy 35 to 40% of the world's remaining natural lands. So these cultures hold the most ancient lineages on Earth, as well as the largest stores of biodiversity and carbon. One thing I wanted to share with you all, which just requires me to reshare my screen for a minute, is we just launched the One Earth Navigator, which I'm going to pull up and share with you right now. This is a map of nature. A map of the world that is drawn by nature. I'm going to show it to you in one moment. Give me a moment. There we go. So you can all go to our website and check out this navigator, but what you are seeing here is a map of the world drawn by nature. So there are 185 bioregions around the world, and these are common assemblages of plants and animals and climate that have to be thought of together in order for us to kind of correctly start to support and restore natural ecosystems. We worked with over 40 leading conservation scientists to start to, really build the bioregions, which are based on all the ecoregions of the planet. So if you go down here, you can see all the ecoregions of the world. Also, if you go to this, so every different color that you're seeing is a different ecoregion. And on our website, you can learn about all the different ecoregions on the planet, really zooming in, zooming out to get an understanding of the vast diversity of the planet. It'll also just geolocate you so that you can get really familiar with the ecosystems, the bioregion in your area, and an understanding of the vast diversity that you're a part of. So I just wanted to share that because I think we're in this moment that challenges us to think differently, both about boundaries, political boundaries, and instead start thinking about the earth and our relationship to the earth and the vast diversity that we stand and live on. So this is a tool for everyone to kind of explore and understand the land on which you live. There also, and I'll get to this later on maybe in the discussion, but we are also building a marketplace of projects around the world that essentially fall into 3 pillars of climate solutions: that transition to 100% renewable energy, the protection and restoration of nature, and then lastly, helping communities and farmers transition to regenerative agriculture. So going back to the PowerPoint, and sorry for going back and forth like this, but that's the only way to show you something live. So the last piece I wanted to share with you is the global safety net. So in the One Earth climate model and in really looking at natural climate solutions, one of the biggest pieces is that nature pillar. So the protection and restoration of 50% of the world's lands and oceans. That number doesn't come out of thin air. It's now backed by science. So we spearheaded a 2.5-year effort with leading conservation scientists to produce the global safety net, which came out last October, actually, almost a year ago, last September. And this was a published peer-reviewed piece of science. We also built an app called the Global Safety Net app, which allows you to zoom in and understand the roadmap of nature that needs to be protected and restored in your region, your country, and your state. I'm going to share a video about the global safety net and then turn it over to Atosa. But I did want to say that, these natural areas around the world that need to be protected and restored act as our global carbon sponge, and they store 2 trillion tons of carbon above and below the ground and absorb 10 gigatons of CO2 per year. So we need to protect all of these natural areas, but that's not enough. We also have a huge opportunity through restoration to connect them together in a network of corridors, if those are done strategically, giving us huge potential to remove additional carbon. So why don't I just turn it to the video to share with you. It's just a quick short video under 3 minutes, and it gives you an overview of the science and the different layers that were incorporated to produce the global safety net. And then we can kick it over to Atosa.
Thank you, Justin.
Is key to rebalancing our global climate system and ensuring a vibrant future for all. Ecosystems absorb carbon from the atmosphere and produce the essentials for life on our planet: fresh water, clean air, and healthy soil. Intact natural lands also help to prevent viral outbreaks like COVID-19. Tragically, in the past 50 years, we've lost half of our natural land, destroying 2/3 of all living creatures on Earth. We must reverse the damage, and we can, by creating the global safety net, a network of land areas that are vital for nature and humanity. The global safety net is the first comprehensive estimate of the total land area requiring protection to solve the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. There are 6 main layers that make up the global safety net. First are areas already protected by governments, totaling 15% of the planet's land. Second are species rarity sites. These are additional areas that need to be protected immediately before rare animals and plants are lost forever. Third are high biodiversity areas, groupings of plants and animals that are vital to maintaining our ecosystems. Fourth are large mammal landscapes, like the Pantanal wetlands of western Brazil, home to the world's largest jaguars. Fifth are areas with a large extent of intact wilderness, continuous forests, shrublands, and grasslands. Sixth are land areas that provide additional carbon absorption and storage, helping to stabilize our global climate system. The global safety net also incorporates an analysis of potential wildlife corridors, areas of degraded land that can be restored to connect ecosystems back together, allowing nature to be more resilient as the Earth warms. Taken together, the layers of the global safety net total approximately 50% of the world's land, offering a blueprint to restore our biosphere, helping to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and providing the ecosystem services vital to our survival. Over 1/3 of these lands are communally held by Indigenous peoples, which demonstrates the importance of safeguarding territorial rights for these communities. You can explore the global safety net through a new web application, which displays how every country and region can contribute in different ways towards this common goal. Visit gsnapp.org to learn more about your region and how it can contribute towards a world in which nature and humanity coexist and thrive together.
Wow, that was amazing, Justin. We had so many comments in the chat of how inspired folks are that these tools have been created. And without further ado, Atosa, would love to have you share about your work, and particularly the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative and the relationship between reforestation and conservation that you're working so diligently on. Welcome, Atosa. Yeah. Still have music playing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Is that my computer? Or?
It might be, though. I noticed the website for the 80 by 20 has beautiful music playing, so
Oh yeah, okay,
it might be you, which is wonderful. We should drop the link for folks to sign on to that declaration.
Well, I wanted to start maybe with a 2-minute video of the 80 by 20.
Perfect.
So let me just, I was trying to figure out how to share it. Okay, here we go. Sharing screen. Here it is. Okay, can everyone hear that? Does the audio come through? Great.
It's a little choppy, Atosa.
Maybe I'll send you the page, the link, and you could stream it from your.
I wonder if we can drop the link in the chat and have folks watch it after this. I wonder if would that work for you, Atosa, to have folks go there, because then folks can actually sign the declaration too, which is what.
Sure, I can just summarize what the video would say. So basically, the building on what Justin described, which is this living Earth, our biosphere is a living system. The Amazon is one of the vital organs of our biosphere. People have heard a lot that it's the heart of that's the lungs of the planet, in the way that it the trees sequester carbon and breathe out oxygen. However, it's indigenous peoples have always said that the Amazon serves like the heart of the circulatory system of the planet. And the way that that happens is through the trees. In fact, every mature tree, of which there's nearly 400 billion in the Amazon basin, basically evapotranspire 1,000 liters of water per day into the sky. Together, all of them, those 400 billion trees generate atmospheric rivers, these flying rivers that bring rain deeper and deeper into the continent of South America. In fact, circulating one molecule of rain 6 or 7 times before hitting the Andes, and some of that rain, atmospheric rivers coming south into Southern Cone, and a good part of it coming north to North America. In fact, the Amazon is like the heart of the circulatory system of the planet. And the trees are the key to that. In fact, you've been hearing maybe in the news lately that the Amazon is reaching a tipping point of ecological collapse. That's a collapse of the hydrological system. When so far, I'm also part of something called the United Nations Science Panel for the Amazon, where 200 of the world's foremost scientists have basically created the first and comprehensive assessment of the state of the Amazon and what is needed to avert a tipping point. And what we found is that about 17 to 18% of the Amazon is already completely deforested. Another 17% is degraded, so only has patchwork of forests. And that we are now overall, forest cover overall is close to having lost somewhere around 20 to 25% of the forest cover of the entire Amazon basin, if you consider what's degraded and what's deforested. And what that does is it's pushed the hydrological cycle into the brink of unraveling. In the way that trees lift up, the moisture into the air, the absence of trees, specifically between 20 and 25% of forest cover, will mean that the rain is no longer circulated, and the forest no longer is able to generate enough rain to sustain itself. And what we're going to see is a tipping point, a crossing of a threshold, after which is a rapid unraveling, where we're going to see the forest become a mass savanna, a massive dieback of forest, and savannaization of the Amazon, which would release incredibly massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere and carbon, and we would basically be the game over for climate. So the Amazon is now factoring in a central figure in the battle on climate stability and also restoring the hydrological system. What the Amazon has taught us is that there's, that this is a new awakening around the water paradigm, that this is we're a water planet, and that forests, soil, and trees and vegetation help to basically hold on to moisture and cycle the moisture through the landscape. And that ultimately, water, circulation of water in nature, both through small and large water cycles, is key to basically dealing with climate stability and life. And in fact, some of the scientific modeling says if we work on restoring the hydrological cycles, both small and large, all over the planet, we could beat back climate change in a matter of decades instead of centuries if we just only focus on carbon. So this is, the basis of which the work that's happening now. The tipping point calls, to avert a tipping point, the campaign is calling for the permanent protection of 80% of the Amazon by 2025. And that requires massive restoration because we were already below that amount. And so we would, like Justin said, we need landscape connectivity. Also, as climate changes, species move higher up in elevation from the lowland rainforest into the higher elevations to address the warmer climate. And when they get to the higher levels of mountains, they get to areas that are incredibly deforested. And so we're going to need to reforest and reconnect landscapes in a massive way. So I'll now talk a little bit about the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. It's an initiative that has been around since 2017, when indigenous peoples of Ecuador and Peru got together and called for basically an end to the fragmentation and extractive industries, oil, mining, roads, and all of the industrial scale development that was basically being imposed on this area of the Amazon, which is key to the hydrological cycles of the Andes Amazon region, but also has registered the highest biodiversity anywhere on Earth. It's also about 60% indigenous lands that are either claimed or in the process are already recognized as indigenous territories. So the alliance was formed, the Sacred Headwaters Alliance. We came together to produce basically the last 3.5 years, a bioregional plan, a 2030 vision, where basically indigenous people's own cosmology about the idea of buen vivir, living in harmony with nature, is at the DNA of a vision for restoring, conserving, and permanently protecting this large landscape. And as I said, it's the size of Oregon. It's massive. We've done significant mapping in the bioregional plan, and I just have it right here, hot off the press. This is the summary. The actual report is over 400 pages, but this is 150-page executive summary of the bioregional plan. It looks at everything from transition, economic transition, to conservation, to restoration, to reforestation. And so anyway, there's so much to say about that, but I'll just give you some quick points around reforestation, restoration. One is that we need to, we did mapping of, basically the corridors, the needs for restoration and reforestation. And we basically came up with a figure of 9 million hectares, almost 9 million hectares. So approximately almost 20 million acres, 22 million acres of rainforests and degraded lands that need to be restored or reforested. And that is a huge target. And we realized that we're starting with a plan to work, we're working on a 10,000 hectare 3-year vision for restoration. And that requires a massive scale of working with indigenous peoples in their own communities to create nurseries, to start to develop tree planting programs, to institutionalize tree planting to not just indigenous peoples, but to universities and high schools, the state governments themselves, the provincial and local governments, and a massive program of restoration. We are also supporting COICA, the coordinating body of indigenous peoples of the Amazon Basin, has a program called NUMI, N-U-M-I. That is a program that is bringing together, and I visited this recently when I was in Ecuador, and nurseries, basically nurseries that are helping bring about species that are actually both edible, so edible forests, and also address needs for things like wood products for housing and bamboo and things like that, as well as species that bring back fish and wildlife and fauna. So there's a holistic system of bringing back these pilot projects that can be scaled up that we're really excited about. And so what I would end with is just to say that the scale of reforestation and regeneration that we need to do and forest ecosystem restoration is massive. We really need to work with the indigenous and local peoples to do it. We need pilot projects to help elevate the working models. Women are key to these programs. We're finding that the women's projects are key, and that's one of the goals that indigenous peoples themselves said is we want the women, the communities to do this, that indigenous-led conservation and restoration will be a key feature to the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. We're going to be launching the Sacred Headwaters Fund to help fund basically the pilot phase of many initiatives. I've just only talked to you about the reforestation part, but there are many others. And I'll stop there. I know there'll be questions and there's more to say, but I would say that the reforestation and restoration initiatives in the sacred headwaters will meet multiple goals at the same time, from food and nutrition to livelihoods and economies, to ecosystem restoration, to carbon sequestration, watershed restoration, women's empowerment, and ecological, it's part of the whole ecological transition. They're not just a siloed part, they are, a system-wide transitional strategy. And so we're excited about it. And I can put the link to download the bi-regional plan and lots more to say. And COICA, and I also want to just say COICA, the Coordinating Body of Indigenous Peoples of the Amazon Basin, is the organization that's helping lead all 9 countries of the Amazon and their strategies. And their pilot program is small right now, but they're envisioning it to reach out the entire Amazon Basin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atosa. So we're gonna go into some audience questions, but just to kick it off, I would love to have a lot of the questions that were preceded were around examples of reforestation done right with a right tree, right place, right community approach. And I'm curious if either of you have examples you'd like to share, and maybe Justin, you would want to touch on the project marketplace that One Earth has. But that would be such a great way to start our interactive Q&A, would be to talk about some of the on the ground reforestation done right examples.
Yeah, there are a ton of, and I'd love actually if audience members have specific stories of really successful projects to share. I think that would be really helpful too, because just hearing case studies of the types of projects that are working and need to be, replicated and scaled is really exciting. A couple of things. So I mentioned the project marketplace on the website, on One Earth's website. This is, we launched this about a year ago. We are sourcing and vetting hundreds and eventually thousands of projects from around the world that are critical climate solutions. So as I mentioned before, projects that are supporting the transition to 100% renewable energy, projects in this case, and very relevant, that are protecting and restoring 50% of the world's lands and oceans. And then the last piece being, helping the shift to regenerative agriculture. It's interesting. Restoration projects can really kind of fall across both of those last 2 pillars that I mentioned. So the conservation and restoration of nature, and then there's also, trees on crops and other methodologies that are part of regenerative agriculture. So it's really about those second 2 pillars and understanding the overlap between protecting and restoring natural areas, and then also transitioning us away from a very toxic way of producing our food to regenerative forms that have a whole array of methodologies that allow for deeper carbon storage into the ground. As far as specific projects, I guess the one that always comes to mind, which is very relevant to Atosa's work too, in the Amazon, that I think is just a good example for us to hold up around the type of projects that we should be supporting. So I had the honor of doing an initial seed grant to what is now Amazon Frontlines many years ago. I must have been, and actually Atosa introduced me to the leader of Amazon Frontlines. We all met together in Rio. So at any rate, originally the project within Amazon Frontlines, which at that time was called Give Clear Water, they were looking for initial capital and philanthropic resources to bring clean rainwater catchment systems that were being built in partnership with the indigenous communities of the Amazon region in Ecuador. And it was really apparent to me in having deeper conversations with the indigenous leaders at the time down in Rio when I first became aware of this work, as well as Mitch Anderson, who founded Amazon Frontlines, that actually bringing and working in concert with indigenous communities to bring them clean rainwater catchment systems so that they would be empowered through health, because all of their waterways were, suffering from toxic oil spills that were then, making their communities and their kids sick with cancer and dying. So it's, originally the framing on this was more of a development lens, right? Trying to bring clean, or a health program to bring clean water to Indigenous communities that were impacted by oil spills. But really, right away, it was clear to me that if we wanted to have long-term preservation and restoration of the Amazon, then the Indigenous peoples themselves needed to be supported, need to have their own health restored, first of all, and then they needed to be supported to protect their lands, waters, and cultures. So this, at the time, at the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, I presented this to Leo as a conservation project, and it became that. And so over many years, we started increasing the funding to that project because they started incorporating a broader and deeper, more holistic plan to do the protection and restoration work, but with Indigenous communities in the lead. And ultimately, that led to the birth of the Sabo Alliance, which was an alliance of 4 tribes in the Amazon coming together for the first time formally to work together for the protection of their lands and culture. And the leadership of Alicia and Namonte Nkimo down with the Sabo Alliance, 2 female Indigenous leaders who probably many of you have heard of, who really led the way in a very holistic model of conservation and restoration efforts for their lands that ended up, formally protecting 700,000 acres of rainforest in their lands and setting a legal precedent for the protection of millions more. But this required, thinking beyond just one sector, thinking beyond just planting a tree. It required really understanding a landscape, the original peoples there, and the opportunity for doing things the right way. And it was long-term funding that got scaled up over time, and that was done with a form of philanthropy that I call trust-based philanthropy, which is building a deep relationship with a partner, asking them what they need, being with them in dialogue, being in support of them, and helping them grow their work. But to me, that is actually the best long-term solution out there, is working that way. But it does require us to think differently than I think our world has been designed over the last century. Everything is very siloed. But we are in an interesting moment where those silos are starting to break down, and people are starting to understand that they can't, you can't just do development work. You can't just do water work. You can't just do, you need to be thinking holistically. And if you are in the privileged position of being able to allocate resources philanthropically to projects like this, then you have to redesign your system to fit what the needs are on the ground. So I'll stop there, but that's just a good example of a powerful project that had a lot of impact and will continue to have a lot of impact.
That's wonderful. Tosa, do you want to respond to that prompt as well?
Sure. Well, I was just in Ecuador. I mentioned I was there for a month and I was basically visiting a number of really exciting projects. And one of them was the nurseries that Koika through the NUMI project had created. And it's basically, they were growing 22 species of trees. And then those nurseries, they were creating the seedlings. And then the nurseries are propagating and working with a network of indigenous communities that then are also contributing both seedlings and larger plants for planting to this nursery program. And basically their plan is to really target, as I said, the basically help communities provide stipends and compensation to communities to create the nurseries, to collect the seeds, to grow all of the, what we have to realize is to do large scale restoration, we need large scale seed gathering and native nurseries. And that some of those nurseries, some of the tree species like the sabo, which are the sacred tree to the indigenous people, that grow to be 600 years old, like Nemonte's organization is called the Sabo Alliance, because this tree is sacred. You know, finding indigenous know-how in helping cultivate those, in having an, you know, they were often logged. These trees, these large trees were often logged. And they are, you know, the cornerstones of a healthy forest, and they're sacred. And so working with indigenous peoples to really massively increase the number of seedlings and plantings of the sabo. And then the others are like trees that are, you know, for their gardens. They do have these horticultural gardens that are their ancestral gardens that feed the communities, that have fruits and nuts and many plants, and to bring that diversity to gardens and to plant trees that are nutritious and medicinal, to bring back the medicinal plants. And those things I thought were, you know, a great way in for communities to restore their own health and nutrition and culture and connection to the land, out of which can now then be ecosystem restoration. Also, a lot of trees are used for lumber for boats that need to be replenished, because their, you know, populations are increasing in these regions. And so indigenous peoples are planting those species that are really important to them for their local economy and self-reliance. So anyway, so I was really moved by this NUMI project and its vision, which is right now in the pilot phase. And I'll be happy to share their synopsis of the project with the group once at the end of the call, maybe as a follow-up email. I think it's what I like about it is that it's involving a lot of women and a lot of communities, and it's trying to scale up this idea in a regional way, a regional approach.
Amazing. And I'll just share very briefly a case story of a project that Trees for Climate Health was able to fund, which we're very, very fortunate to work with Fundacion Aliados, which is a project working in the Ecuadorian Amazon. The Fundacion has worked with the Quechua for more than 10 years. And this is a region that traditionally practiced smallholder agroforestry, but the area is now threatened by deforestation from oil and mining, cattle ranching, and monocrop agriculture. And so the Fundacion Aliados has been working with the Quechua community to help build sustainable livelihoods. And so the Fundacion is really working to build viable agroforestry businesses with this community. And so we were able to support them in their next phase to plant 20,000 trees. And by 2025, they have a vision of partnering with 500 farming families to restore 250 hectares of degraded tropical forest. So this is one of those that we lifted up through our data-driven approach as being really exemplary in terms of those cascading benefits that I mentioned earlier, economic livelihoods, reforestation embedded in a conservation ethos, and certainly a hotspot of biodiversity that Justin mentioned. So with that, just curious if there are questions alive for folks in the on the call right now, and if not, you know, I'm just brimming with questions to ask. But you're just seeing if there's questions that are, while folks are coming up with their questions. Maybe just, oh, Karen, yes, please. Karen is on our advisory board and would love to have you ask a question.
My question, since I'm on your advisory board and I've been invited onto like 3 or 4 other advisory boards, much larger scale, and it was exciting to hear kind of what Atosa and Justin are doing, is what efforts are there to coordinate amongst these groups? Because it seems like there are so many, I like to call tree growing, not planting efforts across the globe, and trying to make sure that we're coordinating rather than duplicating efforts to be the most effective.
I can jump in. This is not probably specific enough. So I'd love Erin and Atosa to jump in if I miss things. But what I have observed is, you know, the networks of folks doing this critical work are deep and wide. And there are regional networks that work together on a regular basis and share knowledge and know-how. I mean, Atosa can point to tons of different networks across the Amazon, you know, that exist by region. And then there are some amazing, especially kind of women-driven networks out there, like Women's Earth Alliance and others that are really incredible forums for sharing learnings across projects. But I would say, you know, as always, our movement is very diverse and in some ways often scattered because everybody is fighting an uphill battle and working and up against so much. So is there opportunity for more shared learning and, you know, opportunities for kind of sharing a better strategy, perhaps by region? Absolutely. I think we definitely need more of that, but I don't know of a network that is specifically just focused on the restoration effort and in particular kind of tree planting. So it's a great question. Atosa or Erin?
Well, I will say that, you know, for most of my career, I was focused on protecting standing forests. And so I kind of was like, oh, other people will handle the restoration. I just got to focus on, you know, pristine areas and protecting large roadless areas. It's only been in the last 4 or 5 years as we know more about the science of the tipping point, as we learn about the, you know, the basically fragmentation in the Amazon, that where it's become more of my radar. And I do think that there's a lot of reforestation restoration happening that's not even visible. That's not networked. It's very local and regional. Yeah. And so we do need to kind of help macroscope of seeing what's happening. And now these mapping tools are helping us see actually we need restoration and reforestation in these areas and who's working there. How do we help them scale up what they're doing, and and Indigenous peoples, I would say, are, you know, a key to that because they have the traditional knowledge, and that knowledge has been mostly serving their territories, very inwardly focused. And so to lift that up, I think, is a key part of what we need to do. I also think that, you know, I've been really inspired by groups like Tree Sisters, and for folks who are, I don't know if this was, I don't know if you timed this as part of the Shift network. Tree Sisters is a network of activist women that are supporting tree planting all over the world. They're actually having their Shift music festival right now. You can go to shiftmusicfestival.com. It's starting today through Sunday. They're working on supporting a number of tree planting initiatives led by women all over the world. And they have a huge lineup of musicians and activists speaking, so people can learn more about that network too. But I take the point. We need best practices. We need really strong networks, and we need to connect people who've been focused on conservation with the people who are focused on restoration, because those have been kind of siloed up to now.
Yeah, I would just say that that's been my perspective. I know that Tom Crowther's group is trying to set up, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the restore mapping that they're doing. I'm on their scientific advisory board too, and sort of I think there's some pros and cons there about how they're approaching it. But I do think there is, and I think there's this, I get lots of one-off inquiries from people like, how would I do restoration best? Or, you know, and I'm always like, you know, I work on tropical forest restoration, but not, I know the places that I work or I work with collaborators. And so I think that trying to make more resources available, also just having a better network of, I get asked by people all the time, like, you know, which projects are more successful. And frankly, a lot of the projects, you guys talked about some good projects that had longevity, but that's always my concern, is that there's so many that are just pop up, you know, there's not a lot of, particularly in the last year or two, and kind of showing where there's demonstrated track records. And I know there's groups that have been trying to look at this, like with WRI, and I'm not familiar with the marketplace, but if that's just something you're thinking about, you know, like be able to say, well, we actually have some track record, and there's pretty good ideas of what makes successful projects, as you all said, like including local peoples and meaningfully and ideally initiated by them. You know, what, yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's sort of this barrage of groups. And so it's hard to kind of, I think, for the average person to make sense of what's happening. It's also hard for people who are trying to do sort of small scale projects on their own it would be great if they could draw better on existing knowledge. So I can plug for that.
And just briefly to speak from Trees for Climate Health's perspective, you know, we really did a landscape analysis at the onset of this project to really understand what the existing tree planting campaigns were talking about. And one of the things we ascertained is that there was a gap in terms of talking about frontline community-led, women-led projects. And so we're certainly, Atosa mentioned Tree Sisters, they're on our advisory board as well. And we're certainly, we mean for this initiative to be additive to existing networks and existing movements. And so we're a part of the, OneT.org and a number of reforestation initiatives to really try and drive the thesis of having these projects be led by community, by women, by Indigenous leaders, and to really try and incorporate more of that ethos into the existing networks that are advocating for tree projects. And we mentioned a few of our a few of the funded projects in the chat, and we will send out all of our comprehensive funded projects as a slideshow for all the participants on this call and those that I'm getting a flurry of emails this morning from folks who couldn't join live but are really eager to watch the recording. So you will have that as available to you to share, and they are also on our website.
And also, this is kind of a live example of the type of coordination and collaboration that is necessary and possible. But, Erin and I did not meet until we were going to be doing this panel together. And by way of getting to know each other and knowing the incredible effort that they've done to start to identify and vet some of the best projects on the ground, we'll be working with Erin to get a number of those projects up on the project marketplace. So just giving them more light, really shining a light on grassroots, community-led, Indigenous-led, people of color-led projects, women-led projects that many of our partners have already vetted and have already gone to a lot of trouble to ensure that they're really best practices. Part of the issue here is just the grassroots networks of folks that are doing some of the best work have very limited resources. They're focused on the work on the ground. They don't have big marketing teams. They're not easy to find. So part of our goal with the project marketplace, and then a new initiative that I'll share a little bit more about, is really making transparent and available the incredible efforts on the ground that are out there that need resources to scale now. And I mean, the next 5 years are critical from a climate change perspective and in changing how we allocate resources. So the hope of the project marketplace, and then this new initiative that we'll be launching more publicly next year called Daughters for Earth, are efforts to really elevate these grassroots incredible efforts to protect and restore the earth. They need the resources. People need to know about them. We don't want these small groups having to spend their limited capacity doing shiny booklets and pamphlets and marking materials. Let's get them the resources to move and scale their work. So the Daughters for Earth initiative, just to do a call out on that, because I'd love to talk to anybody who's interested in joining that effort. We are partnering with Jody Allen and Rachel Rivera on this, as well as Zainab Salbi, who's an incredible humanitarian and activist for women's rights. And launching a new initiative campaign and fund called the Daughters for Earth initiative. It will have its own website. It's being driven and operated by One Earth, but it's a call to action asking women, daughters, grandmothers, all women to come together to help support and scale women-led, women-operated efforts around the world to protect and restore the earth. So we are working on getting pledges from high net worth individuals initially, and potentially even corporates, so that we can come out of the gate with a strong grant making portfolio and get resources to this incredible network, and then invite the public in to join this. Individual citizens who do lower dollar amounts account for 70% of charitable donations. So humans are incredibly generous, and they are motivated to act right now, and they want a channel to allocate resources and to be part of the solution. And so, I'd love for folks to track that initiative. We already have the initial website up, but we won't be doing a big push on it publicly until next year. But I think this is a really powerful moment for elevating the work that is already happening. If we scale, it's a huge opportunity to change the direction that we're heading.
We've got a question coming in from Marlena. There's a strong interest in natural climate solutions in the lead up to COP. Who are your governmental allies right now? And how are you going to amplify the influence of Indigenous-led projects versus corporate monocrop tree plantations?
Great question.
Tosa, you want to take that? Yeah.
I don't know how, but we have to. I mean, I know we must. Definitely, there's, as you know, basically stakes on climate is so high that corporations are all looking for tree planting as a low-hanging fruit of their investments for offsetting their carbon emissions and reducing their emissions. And if we just go by the calculus of sequestration, monocultures will be the way forward, and that's not what the earth needs. And so I think the European governments are looking at restoration forestry regulations. I've been more impressed with things coming out of the UK, for example, where the groups like Fern and the Forest Movement Europe are leading the due diligence process and the evaluation of nature-based solutions, which is what's being promoted without really enough safeguards. And so there are European governments listening to European NGOs. I don't think that's been as much of a battle cry here in the United States, or actually I'm in Europe right now, but in the United States. But I do think that, we in terms of the Amazonian countries, I think that obviously the new president of Ecuador is speaking from both sides of his mouth. He's saying he's committed to ecological transition, and he thinks, our plan is a roadmap for his administration. But at the same time, he's, talking about doubling mining and oil licenses from the Amazon. So who knows if he's a true ally, but I think we do have to hold the Amazonian governments, hold their feet to the fire. They signed a treaty called the Leticia Pact in 2019 after the forest fires in the Brazilian Amazon. They committed to restoration, and I think we have to really push their commitments. We do need institutional commitment to watershed restoration and reforestation. We need government commitments, but they need to be done according to the best available science and ecological principles, or we're, basically creating other problems. So I think, the science panel for the Amazon is a space to watch. I'll put the website in a second. The report, the summary report's coming out soon. That's just a highlight of the draft report. The full report will be released at COP, and it's basically sounding the alarm bells for the entire planet, and it's calling for major action on reforestation. And it's got to be, Carlos Nobre, the scientist who's one of the lead authors of the science panel, talks about 800,000 square miles of Amazon deforestation that needs to be restored. It's mostly abandoned land. Maybe those need to be, those need large scale support to do that kind of restoration. Obviously, that's not our niche. Our niche is community driven, bottom up, but we need both. We need policy from the top, but we definitely don't need monocultures. We've got to fight that.
Erin, I can add on to that. Well, just to share that what's exciting to me to see, just because we've been beating this drum for a while, is that folks from all different stakeholder groups, including governments, are starting to see the deep intersection between solving the climate crisis and protecting biodiversity. And I think, the hard work and efforts of many different networks of scientists that have been producing the validation of the role of nature in solving the climate crisis is helping to move that forward. What's really interesting is that it could completely change the paradigm around country scale commitments to solving the climate crisis. Protecting and restoring nature should be part of their commitments, with the UNFCCC and with the COP coming up. Many folks, everybody's aware of the Climate Convention. Less people are aware of the Biodiversity Convention. And even less people are aware, far less, of the Desertification Convention. But these conventions, which are these global frameworks for getting countries to work together to solve kind of common global wide issues, they should be connected to each other. So, your commitments on biodiversity should be included in your commitments to solving the climate crisis. And what's super interesting, if you guys look under the ranking section of the global safety net, you will see that it's many of the developing countries that hold most of the natural, intact natural lands that are so important to keeping carbon stores intact. So it could completely kind of change the paradigm. And we are seeing folks kind of become aware about this, about the power play that happens between developing and developed countries in negotiations like the COP. It's really the developing countries that should be supported in actually backing up calls to action to protect and restore their natural, inherent, intact lands as part of solving climate change. So, we are working closely with a small ally of campaigning organizations and scientific organizations to really elevate, natural climate solutions and the science behind that in conversations with government leaders. So Avaz is a big partner of ours. And I have to say, many people are starting to wake up, and we're starting to see, countries make large scale commitments, including France and Spain are committed to the 50% global goal, which is pretty game changing. And we're starting to see even interest within the United States for understanding the science-based targets for the protection and restoration of nature in the climate context. So if we do things right as a network and as a movement, I think over the next couple of years, we could have some pretty dramatic change in the acknowledgement of natural climate solutions.
Thank you both for that. We have a question coming in live around researching the role and effects of drones in tropical reforestation because of their ability to plant tree seeds much more quickly than humans. So if you could speak to your experience and if you're tracking this, and specifically, there's some mention in the question around what are your thoughts on drones for reforestation? Sure.
I can take a crack at it. I'm actually I'm interested in if you've been doing research, I'd love to hear what Chang, what you think. I'm definitely been watching the space, and I met with Tom Chi, who's an incredible inventor and part of a drone reforestation company, and he's part of the a number of environmental efforts. Anyway, he was talking. I was asking him about this because I was like, well, how does that compare to like the role of indigenous traditional knowledge and seed savers and communities? And his perspective was that there are many places that are totally denuded of vegetation, that have hardly no irrigation possibility, and are hard to reach in steep mountainsides and steep areas where human reforestation would be much more difficult. that drones are helping both through AI determine things like water courses and areas where moisture is present enough to do restoration forestry without irrigation, and that those are the best areas for, there's sort of this subset of areas that's prime for drone pellets, which are, they're like, they shoot little pellets of seeds and gel packs of nutrition in deep, several inches into the soil, increasing the germination rate. And they're doing AI studies of landscapes and finding ways that their watercourse areas, the areas of shade or high likelihood of survival for that primary, pioneer species to first get hold before you can build from there into more restoration. And they're hard to reach areas that we're not going to get to with manpower. And so there's a place for it. It seems like they're doing some experiments. The jury's still out, obviously. Indigenous peoples are also using technology. They're using drones to monitor their territories, patrol and understand their corridors and their watersheds. So I do think it's, technology is starting to really be an ally to Indigenous peoples, and if it's done well, it can be. But I'm interested. Maybe there are others who think it's ludicrous or not worth it. But Tom Chi also told me about, similarly, he's developed drone robotics that can restore coral reefs, 20 times the speed of a human restoring a piece of coral reefs. That doesn't mean that we don't need people, we need people, but these technologies can help us restore much larger areas in a much shorter period of time. And also, you don't need all the tanks and all the fuel and all the people that would go underwater to restore coral reefs. So I don't see a problem with that. I think those kinds of technologies can really help accelerate what we need to do for our planet.
Thanks, Atosa. Yeah, sometimes at LIFT we talk about, rather than AI replacing humans, how can it augment and support humans to be the most creative, community-based stewards we can be? So that would be, yeah, that was a really insightful response to a really potent question. Justin, do you have anything to add before we go on to? Okay, great. Can
I just say something too? I mean, I think it also, I think Atosa gave a great example, which is any methodology, it needs to be tested. And I think the drone methodologies are really new, and so really need rigorous comparisons. And also you need to think about when it's the appropriate technology. And as we've talked about all along, involving stakeholders is important. And so in a lot of these communities, involving them in the tree planting rather than being looked at as a cost is a benefit. And so that's really important. And so that depends. When I've had conversations of another place where it might be really relevant is, in California where I live, and there's a lot of work being done in the mountains after fires. Sometimes that may need to be planted anyways, but that's a case where it may actually make more sense than in some of these really community-led projects in the global South, where you really want to incorporate people in. If it's big public lands in the US, then that might be a place where drones play a role. So it is really about what Atosa said, tailoring it to what the goals of the project are, and having a toolbox and then picking the right tool.
And just to say, the other piece of that is there's no way those kinds of large scale drone projects can work without humans gathering the seeds and taking care of the trees afterwards. So I think the people who are developing that technology, I think they do realize that.
But one thing they've actually been using, I think they're kind of more successful for, is if you've ever tried to collect seeds in tropical forests, figuring out where they're fruiting is really challenging. And I think one of the places that drones could really be useful, or has been used some now, is kind of like figuring out where they're fruiting trees, so you're not having to go walk through the entire forest trying to find like one species that's fruiting. So that's sort of this, having technology complement humans, so you can know where you should go so that you can go collect the seeds when they're fruiting, rather than having to completely always be walking through the entire landscape.
I would also say that there's we should connect with the Instituto Socioambiental in Brazil. I would say, Aaron, it would be a great follow-up conversation Their team is developing with the indigenous peoples around southern Brazil and Amazon a host of restoration initiatives. And I mean, they're talking about, you know, the kind of diverse seed banks, thousands of seeds that would need to go into reforestation of complex ecosystems. And they'd be a great resource to bring into the mix. They've been experimenting for about 5 or 6 years now with the large scale reforestation and the science of reforestation in the Amazon.
Amazing. We have a question coming in around the relationship between these reforestations in rural areas and the need for reforestation in our urban corridors as well. And, you know, Jonas Trees for Climate Health has funded some really cool urban projects, Tree People in LA doing greening that is mitigating urban heat island effect, Common Vision in the San Francisco Bay Area that's creating economic livelihoods through a tree corps of folks that are very trained to steward urban fruit trees for food security and sovereignty. And so, but I'm curious, yeah, if Justin or Atosa, you could speak to kind of the relationship and kind of, again, this right place approach to tree growing and how the urban regions factor in.
Yeah, I mean, you already spoke to one of my favorite partners that's a great example of this, Tree People in Los Angeles. You know, and Andy Lipticus's work with Tree People, he's been a hero of mine for years. So kind of seeing how that work has evolved and seeing actually its impacts here in Los Angeles since I live here is, you know, it's very relevant. I mean, the urban piece of this is really exciting and interesting. I mean, even in my own kind of backyard, if you will, we live in mid-city Los Angeles, and some of the patches, and LA is one of the worst designed cities in the world around, you know, natural areas and parks having been kind of created to support healthy communities. But we have the Kenneth Hahn Park, you know, which is it's a very powerful example of the need for a restoration opportunity in an urban center, and they are working on it. But it's also very visceral because the oil fields in mid-city LA are literally right in the Kenneth Hahn Park. And this is a park that is, you know, is the most easily accessed park in all of Los Angeles. People from all walks of life use it. And you're going into this very degraded landscape and you're looking at a still running oil field. And at the same time, they have been making incredible progress they've already made a commitment to shutting down those oil wells. I forget what the timeline is, but they've already made a commitment to that. They have already started building corridor restoration opportunities that are piecing together the fragmented parks of Los Angeles and making them also really incredible opportunities for human beings to be, you know, out in nature and reconnecting to the earth. And so they actually just recently in the Kenneth Hahn Park built a bridge over La Cienega, which is a huge, very busy road that goes up and over the hills. And they built a bridge that is also a wildlife crossing and has trees and rocks and plants built into the bridge. And it's such a beautiful example of the opportunity here. You know, and I work so globally that I sometimes miss the boat on very local efforts that are happening. And so just going to Kenneth Hahn and coming across this and seeing this wildlife crossing in an urban center, and they do have evidence of wildlife starting to use it, gives you just a really powerful vision of what's possible here. And the benefits in urban centers to local people, as well as to wildlife, and us kind of creating a future where they're coexisting together. So I know we didn't touch on it much, so I'm really glad that John brought this up. But I think it's a huge, really important opportunity. And we certainly at One Earth will be working hard to identify more and more urban projects that are restoration projects and that are smart kind of connectivity projects that need to be scaled and invested in. So it's a great point. Anybody who has examples to share, and even John yourself, it might be cool to hear about it.
I guess I'll jump in as well and say tree people, I'm huge fans of tree people. And, you know, urbanization is, hydrological system in urban areas is a key part of the solution. I was talking about the paper earlier that was talking about the water paradigm, the new water paradigm. And the fact is that the very small hydrological system and watersheds in urban areas are key and key to reducing the heat island effect, and restoring watersheds, basically making cities more livable, and all of the other benefits of trees. So, and it's where we mostly live. Most of the human population lives in urban areas. So we might as well bring nature right there where we can be more connected. I was living, I was really inspired in, it's a little bit off topic, but I was really inspired by Wangari Maathai when I first went to the Earth Summit in 1992. She was the amazing Nobel Prize winner from Kenya who started the Green Belt movement across Kenya. And seeing the influence she had in both urban and rural populations to basically plant the hundreds of millions of trees that they ended up planting. It was a Green Belt movement in Kenya. It was a movement. It was a cultural movement, a women's movement, and an environmental movement. And I think that we need that. Urban areas are ripe for nurturing who we need to become as humans on this planet. And tree planting in urban areas is key. And I was actually in Hawaii for a good part of last year, and meeting the native peoples who talk about the connection between the rain belt and the green belt. The trees, basically bring in the rain and cycle the rain. And it's not just cosmology. This is, actual way that ecosystems work. And so this deep connection between rain and forests, and rain and green space and trees is something that Indigenous peoples really are connected to. And I think bringing that to urban areas is a key part of our evolution into greening. We need to green urban areas. Need to become ecologically positive influence on Earth. Oops, there was a big wind storm right here. They need to become positive forces of cities are currently, a huge resource suck, and to make them positive, I think urban forestry is key. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time. Oh my goodness, we could talk about these projects all day long. We will send out the projects that we've funded. We'll send out all of these comprehensive links that have been shared today and resources. Thank you so much, Atosa and Justin, for your leadership, for uplifting the work of women and Indigenous communities, for your courage and your dedication and your persistence in not letting these messages get sidelined, which sometimes we see all too often. And thank you so much to all of the participants in this amazing event, for your questions, your curiosity. We've recorded this. Many folks couldn't make it live, and we'll be reviewing the recording, and we'll also share out the recording more publicly to allow this information to spread wide and far. And big thanks to my team at Jonas, Trees for Climate Health, that is on and supporting, and yeah, thank you so much. I hope you all have a great Climate Week coming up.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Thanks, everybody.
I want to see you all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Atosa.